The college football playoff rankings will come out tonight. It is Tuesday morning that I'm recording this. It's going out Tuesday afternoon. Guess what? It's do or die for the Georgia Bulldogs now. We finally reached that point. Going back to the Alabama game, heading into that game, there was still a lot of season to go heading into Tuscaloosa. And we told you, hey, it's not a must-win, right? If Georgia loses this game, it'll be okay. They could still make the playoff. They could still win the national championship. Well, Georgia lost a nail-biter, right? They lost a really good one. A few weeks later, Georgia kind of looks iffy. There's concern. And then you head into the Texas game. Georgia's an underdog for the first time in a long time. The Texas Longhorns are ranked number 1 in the country. We again told you, not a must-win, although you really want to win this one since you didn't win at Alabama. Georgia goes into Austin. They win by 2 scores. And ultimately, that one game is going to really help them in the rankings here. But now that Georgia's lost to Ole Miss, right? It's do or die against Tennessee. If you lose, you're probably not making the college football playoff, barring a miracle where a lot of teams just lose in the last couple of weeks, and then it's like, okay, how do we shove in 12 teams into this thing? Well, Georgia is not going to make it unless they beat the Tennessee Volunteers. And don't get this mistaken or twisted, because I've seen some pretty horrible takes out there. If Georgia beats Tennessee, without question, as long as it takes care of business against UMass and Georgia Tech, without question, Georgia will be in the top 12 heading into the actual playoff. So it's win and get in, it's lose, and I don't know, maybe they're going to send me down to the Citrus Bowl in Orlando or something like that. You don't want me going down to a place I don't want to be at, right? So if Georgia... Look, guys, this Tennessee game is not going to be easy, right? I don't understand exactly why Georgia's such a big favorite over the Vols, because I watched the games. And here's the thing about Tennessee. I'm going to talk a lot about Tennessee and a little bit about the rankings in this. Tennessee's going to be ranked higher, right? At this point, I'm not really looking at the AP poll anymore because it doesn't matter anymore. It's the college football playoff rankings. Tennessee's going to jump up a couple spots because it lost, and Miami and Georgia, or it won, and Miami and Georgia lost. So that's at least 2 spots Tennessee's going to go up. So we're talking about Tennessee being in the top 4, top 5 this weekend, and Georgia. To be honest with you, I'm not sure how the committee's going to view that loss to Ole Miss. They're probably going to view it as a bad one, right? Because we saw that they valued how good or bad that your losses look. Well, if the committee watched the game, which I'm not 100% sure they do watch the games, if they watched the game, they saw that was a bad loss for Georgia. So I think Georgia's going to get punished. I don't think it's going to fall outside the top 12 yet, right? It would take another loss. I think that Georgia will still be a top 12 team this weekend. Somewhere in that 9 to 12 range is where I expect the Dogs to fall in the rankings tonight. I would assume that Alabama is going to be ranked ahead of them. I think there's a good chance that Ole Miss flies up there and is ranked 1 spot ahead of Georgia. Georgia will be ranked ahead of Miami. If Georgia's not ranked ahead of Miami, then some mistakes were made in the rankings, and there's a lot of inconsistencies that they're, again, not addressing with us. So that's how I think the rankings are going to play out tonight. Back to this game. You got to throw those rankings out. 2 years ago, you saw, Georgia was the better team 2 years ago. I can't sit here and tell you that I think unequivocally that Georgia is the better team than Tennessee. We're past that point of me assuming that Georgia's the better team than its opponent, because we've watched enough this year to know, hey, look, they're just not the best team in college football, and they're not playing like it. And what's concerning is they're starting to play a little bit worse and a little bit worse, right? You go back through this past few stretches of games. Let's start with the Alabama game. And then Auburn, solid win. Mississippi State, okay win. Texas, it looks really, really, really good, right? But it was okay. And all the touchdowns came on short fields, and that's whatever. That's how they won the game. But it wasn't all peaches and cream out in Austin. And then they struggled with Florida. Florida's not a very good team. It's a better team than we thought it was going to be. They've competed with some of the top programs this year, but Georgia, it was a bad offensive performance, and mostly because of Carson Beck, right? The Florida game, more than anyone, was, hey, man, Carson just really played bad. Like, that's why Georgia's in the spot. But then he plays well at the end of the game. They go into Ole Miss. They're coming off of a dramatic one against their rival. It's raining. Ole Miss they're frothing at the mouth for this thing, man. There's no other way to put how the Rebel faithful were out in Oxford. I mean, they wanted it way more than Georgia did on Saturday. That's the best way that I would put it. And Georgia lost. They got crushed. They got crushed with field goals. Field goals, right? It was like watching the Falcons-Steelers game in week 1, where the Steelers just beat the Falcons with a bunch of field goals. That's what watching this Georgia game was like. They score off a short field that was created for them by the defense in the first few minutes of the game, and then that was it. They had a good drive at the beginning of the third quarter when they took the opening kickoff, and they took that ball down there, and they kicked a field goal, and that was the only time Georgia was able to get anything done on offense. We're at the point of saying this is just not a good offense. It's had good moments. It had a good second half against Clemson, had a good second half against Alabama. It had a lot of good drives against Mississippi State. But I mean, we're starting to look at a lot of the season and be like, man, that's just either inconsistent or not good. Well, now we have to look at Tennessee. What's Tennessee done, right? Look extremely explosive. They put up all those style points against Tennessee, Chattanooga, NC State, and Kent State, right? NC State ranked at the time. Well, they're not a ranked team, right? That was a ranked win, but that's a bad football team. And then you get into the SEC schedule. Tennessee just put up 30 points for the first time this past weekend against Mississippi State. Outside of that, 28 is the highest they scored. 23 points in an overtime game with Florida. Lost to Arkansas 14-19. The explosive offense that we saw from Tennessee at the beginning of the season just doesn't really exist. Right? Nico Iamaleava, I think I got that right there. I'm just going to call him Nico, as most people are. He's a dynamic quarterback. He's very talented. I understand it, and I think he could be a really good NFL quarterback one day. I think he's going to be a really good college quarterback. The truth is he's inconsistent right now, and he still makes some dumb mistakes, and he overthrows a lot of deep balls. But I'm telling you right now, I mean, look, you just saw Jackson Dart play pretty well against Georgia and lose. If Georgia's not playing well again, Nico Iamaleava, you see that? Nico Iamaleava is going to make them hurt. And he's going to hurt this defense. Now, obviously it's home. It's night for Georgia. That advantage matters a lot. But when I'm looking at what does Tennessee actually do? What does Tennessee do as a football team? They've got a pretty good defense. Not a single time this season has a team put up 20 points on Tennessee. In that loss, it was 19-14. So this is a much improved Tennessee defense, which is the biggest difference between this Vols team and the last few Vols teams who, hey, we could put up 50 on you, but we might let you put 50 on us back. That's not necessarily the case with this version of the Tennessee team. This version of the Tennessee team is a lot more run-heavy. They rely on Dylan Sampson. He is far and away the leading rusher in the SEC, and on top of the yards, he's got 20 touchdowns, right? If Tennessee runs the ball well on Georgia, it's going to be a long night for the Dogs because, as we saw a week ago, Kirby says they're not the same scheme. If you watch Tennessee and you watch Ole Miss, there's some similarities to the way that they run their offense. And what did we see? Georgia sat back in its zone, and Jackson Dart and the backup quarterback, I'm blanking on his name, picked it apart and said, okay, we'll take the 6 yards. We'll take the 8 yards. We'll take the 6 yard. We'll take the, oh, look, a 15-yard pass is wide open. That can happen again. I mean, why can't that happen again? I'm not sitting here predicting that. I'm just telling you what Tennessee is capable of a football team. When you combine the fact that Dylan Sampson has been the most effective, may not be the word, but he's scoring a lot of touchdowns and he's getting the ball a lot, right? He doesn't have the best yards per carry, but he's scoring a lot, and obviously he's getting the ball a lot. They are a good offense. Now, they haven't been explosive. They've struggled. Nico has, since starting with Kent State, actually, I've got the numbers in front of me. Starting with Kent State, he's only thrown for 200 yards once. So, to me, there's a little bit more meets the eye with this Tennessee team. I think that the reasons I'm stating is, hey, like, this team is not as explosive as we thought. Nico has been a lot more inconsistent than we thought. Those are probably the reasons why Georgia's favored by so much. And I'm just going to double check Georgia-Tennessee betting line for you real quick, because the last time I checked it 2 days ago, it was around 11 points. It was around 11 points. 9. Right? So Georgia's favored by 9 points still. That's a little bit too wide of a margin for me. At this point, I do think Georgia's going to win. I think that Kirby will have them prepared, but what you need to understand is this Tennessee team has the ingredients as well. Just like I told you on Five for Friday and Final Feelings last week, Ole Miss has the ingredients. Tennessee's got a good defensive line. They've got good receivers. They've got a solid quarterback. They've got a good running back. They've got the ingredients. It's just a matter if they do it. I don't think that it's going to happen again. I don't think 2 weeks in a row Georgia's going to get embarrassed like that, especially with it being at home for the Dogs. But it's do or die. It's do or die.